Normally my weekly videos are on technology and libraries that are authored by other people, and so this week I'm really excited to say that I've got something to show off to all of you that I actually wrote myself, and I want to walk you through it. I think it's going to be an interesting and fun tool for a lot of people out there in the community. And so I'm kind of calling it JSPlaygrounds right now, but I'm not really dead set on the name. If you want to follow along with this presentation, you can, or this video, I don't know why I said presentation, but if you want to follow along, you can go to this address right here. So Stephen Grider, which is my name, .github.io/JSPlaygrounds. And for right now, JSPlaygrounds has to be capitalized. So make sure you get capital J, capital S, capital P on there as well. So what is this? What do I have on the screen? Well, first off, we got a couple different panels. On the left-hand side is a code editor. And so in the code editor, I can put in some amount of code, and you'll see that instantly I get some feedback on the top right-hand side. All the different panels in here are resizable, so feel free to drag them around to whatever layout you find preferable. So besides just being a code editor, what's the point of this, right? So let's say I've got some number, and we're going to start off with just 10. I can print that number, which we just saw. I can divide that number by 5 or something. I can multiply it by 20. I can also put that number into a string. Your number is number, like so, and now boom, I got my string. I can even, if I want to, throw some JSX in here as well, So I can put in a div, and maybe I've got inside of here number, like so. That's kind of boring, so let's put that inside of a H1, make it nice and big, and there we go, nice big H1. And then just to spruce it up, maybe I'll put a HR in there as well. So I've got the horizontal divide as well. Okay, so everything I've got on here so far, kind of interesting, it's printing out each individual line. So where this starts to get really fun is if I start changing a number or a value in here, all the other values automatically recalculate and update on the fly. So basically the point of this tool is to give you some type of rapid prototyping environment, something to kind of mess around with different technology concepts, figure out what's going on, and just experiment with syntax in general. So I've had a lot of fun putting it together. The other thing you'll notice is that on the bottom right-hand side, you get some automatic error, or I should say just parsing. So in this case, I've got number, and then the number, and then a slash, which is not valid syntax right here. So I got an error about an unexpected token, and presumably it's somewhere on this line. So just something to help you figure out what's going wrong if your code isn't running quite too well. I can also make React components in here all I want. So let's say I've got const greeting, and I'll make this a functional component, and maybe I'll return from here, I don't know, what do we want to make? An H4, why not? Hello. And so now on the JSX block that I have down here, I can put my greeting component as well, and boom, I've got hello right there. I can also make class-based components if I so chose, but that'll be a lot of typing. But yeah, you can definitely make a class-based React component and then toss it into a block of JSX to get it to render. We also got really good support for objects as well. So if I got const object, and maybe it's got a color of red, and then I can just place object like so, and there's my stringified object color is red. So very handy tool. I like it a lot. I'd be really excited to get some feedback from everyone. You can make pull requests, whatever you want to do. If you want to help me out with it, I would love feedback. The repo is at stephengrider/JSPlaygrounds. Right now I don't have any reusable README or anything like that, but you can take a look at the source and figure out what's going on. If there's anything that you want to help me out with, that'd be fantastic. So I want to spend the rest of this video to tell you a little bit about how this thing is put together, because that's probably the most interesting part, and the part that I suspect a lot of people are really curious about. So behind the scenes, the entire thing is just a React and Redux application, and it's surprisingly not that complicated. Well, I shouldn't say that. It took me a heck of a long time to figure out how to do it. What I mean to say is that there are not a lot of moving pieces. I think that would be more accurate to say. So I've got my code editor here. Here's the project. A lot of the stuff is still pretty rough. It can use a little bit of cleanup, which is part of what I hope to get maybe some PRs to help me out with. So let's walk through the events, or kind of the cycle of this thing. First off, I'm using CodeMirror as the code editor. So CodeMirror is a in-browser code editor, and that's what we saw on the left-hand side of the panel. I used a very popular package from Jed Watson, thanks very much Jed, called React CodeMirror to give me a React-compatible version of that editor. So whenever you type in some amount of code into the editor, it fires an onChange event, and I pass it off to an action creator. And the action creator is very simple. It just takes that code, produces an action, and returns it, where it eventually ends up in the reducer, and the reducer catches it. So let's follow that code path around. So here's my editor. Here's CodeMirror right here. And whenever CodeMirror gets changed, we call onCodeChange right here, and that calls my action creator of this.props.update code. So not too bad right here, not too bad. If we go into the action creators file, here's my single action creator. There's only just one action creator for the entire thing. And I call that update code, and here's my action. Yep, it just returns some amount of code. So everything up to this point, kind of, not too crazy on the Redux side of things, not too bad. So we're just taking some amount of code and dispatching or returning an action. Where things start to get a little bit more complicated is after we hit the reducer. So here's my code reducer. We're catching the case did update code, in which case I just say, okay, here's the new code. And the code at this point in time is literally a string. It's just a string of characters. A string of characters that say, here is like the exact bit of code you have. So where things start to get really nasty is inside of the selector and the viewer component. So the selector is a reselect selector. And if you're not familiar with reselect, I've got another video on it from a month or two ago. You could go to check out reselect a little bit if you so chose. So this is my reselect selector right here. And like I said, it's a nasty little bit of code. I would love to get a little bit of refactoring in here. That'd be just fantastic. So let's just do a little bit of a walkthrough and talk about how it works. In general, the way that I kind of figure out how to parse the entire expression, or all this code in here, is I use a library called Esprima. So Esprima, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but here it is right here. I use a method in Esprima called tokenize. So what tokenize does is it turns all of the code in a string. You give it a string and it takes that code and it tokenizes it. By tokenize, I mean it turns it into an array of objects where each object represents one specific token of our code. And a token can be like a parenthesis, a variable name, an equal sign, a multiplication sign, whatever it might be, just some token of code. After I turn it into a tokenized version of the code, I then take a look at all the different parenthesis combinations we could possibly have and eventually figure out what are the valid expressions in this snippet of code right here. So valid expressions would be line 1 by itself, line 2 by itself, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those are all valid single line expressions. Line 10, however, is not a valid expression because it has an opening parenthesis. Only when we go from line 10 to 12 do we get entire valid expression. And the same thing down on line 14 as well. So line 14, I have an opening div. That's not a valid expression. I need to have a closing div as well. So lines 14 through 18 would be a valid expression. After separating everything out into these, what I consider to be a valid expression, I then kind of do a little bit of what I might refer to as like a waterfall execution of code, where I first execute line 1. I decide whether or not it produces a value that I should log over here on the right-hand side. If it does not, I then execute lines 1 and 2 and decide if it produces a usable value. I then execute lines 1, 2, 3, and 4 and decide if it produces a usable value. And in that case, it does. Object right here is a value that I can log off to the screen. I then do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's our number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Number 1 through 7, so on and so on. And basically, this snippet of code right here will be executed something like, 1, 2, maybe about 9 times or so, all with incrementing lines of code. And that's how I get these individual values to actually print up on the screen over here. So for every time you type in a character, it's running your code many, many times with incrementally increasing large snippets of code. So once I actually get a value out of here, like say an object or a number, a string, or even a React component, as we have down here, I then need to figure out how do I actually render this to the screen? And that's the purpose of the viewer component. So the viewer component, here we go, has a method called evaluate expressions. And so for each expression that I returned from that selector, I evaluate the expression. So yes, this is horribly vulnerable to XSS attacks. So I could probably pretty arbitrarily put in something like, alert. Yeah, and there's an alert. So it is pretty darn susceptible to XSS attacks if you are curious. But anyways, inside of evaluate expressions, I look at each expression or the result of each expression. And I decide based on the type of the expression, so can I do some divination to say like, okay, is this a function? Is it a Boolean? Is it an object or is it an array? Whatever it might be, I then decide how to print up the value. So after I decide how to print up the value, I take all those values and actually render them onto the screen. So that's how this tool works. Just a very high level overview. Definitely still could use some help in different areas. I hope to get some time over the next couple of days to spruce up the README a little bit and give some directions on where I want to take the project. I view this as kind of a competitor to a lot of CodePen or things out there like CodePen or JS Fiddle, mostly because this editor or this, this whole construct right here does not require you to actually render something to an HTML document. It just automatically takes all the printable values and tosses it onto the screen over here. You'll also note something that's really important as well, that it's distinctly different than just running code in your terminal. Because if I take all this code and just run it, all I get is the last character down here. So I've got some JSX in there, so that won't run. So if I instead just do this snippet of code, the result is just the very last string here. So the reason I like this editor so much is I get to see incrementally what are all the different values that are flowing about my application. Okay, so this is it. I hope you found this interesting. I hope someone out there finds it as interesting as I find it. It's really great for teaching people about JavaScript just because you can see the value of every single expression as it gets executed. So again, you can check it out at stevengreider.github.io JSPlaygrounds. If you want to contribute in any way, shape, or form, feel free to leave me a comment here or drop me an email, tweet at me, whatever you want. If you enjoyed this video, check me out weekly. I have videos on the JS ecosystem, a lot of fun, different topics, and we get to look at pretty neat tools just like this. So I'll catch you next week.